behalf of the Islesboro Forum Committee, welcome to the third program of the 2020 Islesboro Forum Speaker Series. I'm Gail Jackson and the moderator of today's program. This is our 28th year of presenting distinguished speakers who are experts in a wide variety of fields, from science to the humanities. In a pre-pandemic world, we always presented our speakers in person. But today, with Zoom webinar, our panelists are coming to us from Cooperstown, New York, Washington, D.C., and that cool and lovely place, North Scottsdale, Arizona. We wish to engage all of you in the speaker selection process as we think ahead to 2021. You are invited to go to the islesboroforum.org website and share your ideas with us. And while you're there, please hit the donate button. We hope you will consider the programs we present of value and will want to support them with a donation of as little as $10 or more. Before I close these introductory remarks, I want to acknowledge and thank the 8 other members of the Islesboro Forum Committee, as well as our technical producer, Michael Hutcherson, who makes it possible for us to bring these programs to you. A quick reminder as to our format: once our panelists and speakers have completed their remarks, we will have time for Q&A. You should find the Q&A function on the bottom right of the Zoom webinar screen. Type in your question, hit the enter button, and the moderator will recognize you according to where you are in the queue. Now I would like to turn the program over to Betsy Cohen, the island resident, who brings us today's panel. Betsy will introduce 3 shining lights in the opera world, one of whom also happens to be a longtime friend of mine from Opera Theater of St. Louis. Betsy, over to you.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you to Gail and to Michael for helping us to reimagine the Islesboro Forum. What it allows us to do is to not only have people from Islesboro itself, the geographic location, attending the forum, but those who wish they were on Islesboro. It's a lot cooler than in a lot of other places, who come to us from New York and Colorado and Florida and London, and joining us in a way that is possible today, but may not have been possible even last year. So we're thankful for what we have and delighted to have with us 3 visionaries of opera. Starting with Tim O'Leary. Tim has been the general manager of Washington National Opera for about 2 years. It's almost your anniversary, Tim. And prior to that time was a friend of Gail's in St. Louis, a primary occupation, but also managed to engage in staging a number of very exciting, very penetrating premieres for the St. Louis Opera, and was a pioneer in creating a new way for opera lovers and people who didn't even know they were opera lovers to come together and participate in a new production. I happen to be the beneficiary of that on a one-time basis. I have to tell you only one time, Tim, when Ed and I flew from London to St. Louis for the premiere of An American Soldier by Wang Guo and David Henry Wang. And it was very worthwhile. It ties into our theme today in a very real way, because underneath all of this is the questioning of racism in its broadest sense. Francesca Zambello comes to us from Cooperstown, is a dear friend and an opera visionary. And she, prior to Tim's premiering An American Soldier in St. Louis, Seska was incubated it at the Washington National Opera as a one-act opera. And that gave it its legs, and it trottled off to St. Louis for a full production. Francesca is remarkable. She has a sense of vision, not only about opera, but on a very deeper sense about literature and other elements of our cultural world in a very profound way. Having been the artistic either advisor or director at a number of important opera venues, she has whittled it down to two. We can never get her to one, but she has whittled it down to two and does on a seasonal basis Glimmer Glass in the summer and Washington National Opera in the winter, although we know those are really two full-time jobs. Tim and Seska share a real passion for making opera relevant, new, and living. And that is a very special bond between them. They are now colleagues, and today you'll hear about some of that collaboration. Gordon Hawkins is I've just determined it for myself when he was singing prior to our opening the mic, but is a baritone of great versatility. And he, together with Francesca, have created a role for the Reverend in an opera by the name of Blue, about which you'll hear more, but really speaks to all of the things that we've been thinking about, maybe for many, many years, but certainly today in terms of racism and the way in which it impacts communities. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Tim, who will be the moderator or interviewer and highlight some of these very important issues. You're in for a treat. Thank you.
Betsy, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to appear with two incredible colleagues of mine. You did justice, I think, to Francesca's role in the opera world to the degree that one can. Left out of the introduction is the fact that Francesca Zambello has been one of my heroes in the opera world since my career began. And so when I had the opportunity to interview to become the next general director of the Washington National Opera and therefore the collaborator of Francesca, I leapt at it. It was one of the only things that could have lured me away from the wonderful job I had in St. Louis. And very shortly thereafter, Francesca sent me the libretto to this opera that she had just commissioned at Glimmerglass called Blue. And she asked if I thought this would be a project that we could work on together at the Washington National Opera. I remember reading the libretto on a plane ride over to Washington. And by the time I got off the plane, I was almost done with the libretto, but not quite. And so I had to get a coffee at a Starbucks in the airport and finish reading it. And then found myself weeping in the airport by the time I got to the final page. It's an extraordinary work by Tazewell Thompson, librettist, and Janine Tesori, composer. So in a moment, Francesca and Gordon, we're going to show the audience for the webinar a quick 4-minute overview, a video of highlights from the opera. And I'll sort of talk them through the story before we show the video. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask Francesca and Gordon to say a little bit about what this work meant to them as artists, and Francesca, in your case, as the person who really gave it life. So, Cheska, maybe start us off.
Sure, great. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for those laudatory introduction. Not quite sure about all of it, but thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all the participants and to be virtually in Islesboro. What we're going to show you some clips and talk about the piece. I mean, the genesis of the opera happened in 2015. We were doing a new opera by Philip Glass at the Kennedy Center at that time called Appomattox. The first act was set during the Civil War, and the second act was set during 1965 during the voting rights era. And at that time, there were a sequence of murders of young Black men rather unjustly. And so I asked the director, Tazewell Thompson.
It sounds to me like we've lost Francesca due to an internet. Oh, there you are.
There, okay, sorry, I'm not sure where you lost me.
We heard you say that you asked Tazewell Thompson.
Right, great. I asked Tazewell Thompson if he could envisage an opera about what was going on in America in terms of brutality against young Black men. And from that, this evolved, and let's just talk a lot more about it. I hope I'm coming through okay, am I?
Now you sound absolutely great, and I will come back to you. And let me just say,
coming through okay?
Now we can hear you, Cheska. Yeah.
Okay.
Cheska, thank you for that.
Okay.
I'm going to just quickly turn it over to Gordon. So I'll say that in the opera, the characters don't have proper names. They all have, their names are their roles. It's a bit like Greek tragedy. So everyone's a sort of archetypical character, I should say. And so the names are the mother, the father, the son, the buddies, the girlfriends, and Gordon Hawkins played the role of the reverend. And so Gordon, just say a bit about how you came into the project and what it meant to you once you got from the early stages of rehearsal through to opening night.
Sure. Thank you, Tim. And Gail and Betsy, I want to thank you for your kind invitation to participate in the forum today. I came rather late to the dance on Blue. The concept, as Francesca had mentioned earlier, the genesis was as early as 2015. Francesca and I go back quite a ways to Wolf Trap days back in the late 80s. So I received a phone call from Francesca asking me about looking at this piece. And I knew Tazewell, and I certainly knew Janine. When I received the score, Tim, I had the same reaction as you. I read the libretto before I even started working on the music, and my heart just jumped into my throat because I couldn't imagine something as powerful and as resonant today as any other work that I had done. And I was just excited to come to Glimmerglass to reunite with Cheska and to work with Tazewell again and to develop what I see my character in this piece as being. He's in the Reverend represents the emotional thermostat of the action. So I'm impacted. You would think that the clergy member would be someone that imbues wisdom and power and authority and sanction to the community. It's quite the opposite. The Reverend is impacted by events. And although I have a responsibility spiritually to the Father and the father's progression as a soul and a spirit, what ends up happening for the Reverend, I think, is that he steps out of the authoritative church and he steps more into the community in terms of what does the community need? How do I feel this pain? And what is my responsibility, not only as a member of the faith, but as a member of this human condition, of this Black man in this community who suffered a great loss? And how does he continue on his way in a productive manner without harboring so much anger and being stuck in that? And I think what I end up discovering through the piece is that I have to make an evolution as a human being as well.
Wow. Gordon, thank you so much. You all can tell the emotional content of the piece is extraordinary. And I'll tell you, why am I here as the General Director of Washington National Opera? Well, the piece premiered this last summer at the Glimmerglass Festival. And it was co-produced by the Washington National Opera. It was meant to premiere at the Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center in March. And on March 12th, we closed the Kennedy Center right before a dress rehearsal of this opera. And so all of us at the WNO feel this sense of a mission that is not yet completed because it's a truly important work, the importance of which has only grown in the months since we had to interrupt the productions. We've actually just announced the other day that our reprogrammed season for next year, 2021, will include the resumed production of Blue, running from July 3rd to July 11th at the Washington National Opera, by which point we hope and pray that it is safe for us all to gather again in theaters and create this kind of opportunity for human connection that Gordon was just describing. Let me try to describe to you the story of the opera by way of introducing this 4-minute video that will allow you to hear some of the music and see some of the staging from the Glimmerglass production. And you'll first meet the character of the mother, and when you meet her, she is with her girlfriends and she is expecting a baby. And the girlfriends are all irritated with her because she's about to get married to a guy that they have never met. And they're already expecting the baby, and the girlfriends want to know, why haven't we met him yet? What's been going on with you? And then she reveals to the girlfriends that he is a police officer, a Black police officer. That's in fact where the title of the opera comes from. At one point, he is described as a Black man in blue. And learning that he's a police officer really changes the attitude of the girlfriends, and they demand to know why she has done this crazy thing in getting engaged to a police officer. The story keeps fast forwarding in time, and in the next scene, by the way, I should say, you'll hear the mother describe how she's not going to let the arrival of the baby interrupt her career. She's a restaurateur. She's just going to keep right on working while she raises the child. And then we fast forward to the hospital scene, and the father and the mother are together, and the father gets to hold the baby for the first time, and he realizes it's the first time he's ever held a baby, and he looks into the baby's eyes, and suddenly his world has changed, and he pledges to this new baby boy that he will always be there for him. And then the scene fast forwards again. We see the boy grow up in an incredible theatrical montage. And the next thing we know, the boy is 16 years old, and he and his father have a bitter argument. The boy hates his father because the boy is 16 years old. And he hates his father also because his father is a cop, and his authoritarian parenting style is too much for this boy. He's become an activist for social justice. And you hear the father give the boy what we now all know of as the talk. He at one point is telling him he's got to take off his hoodie, cut his hair, and dress more properly because the father is desperate for his son to remain safe. In the second act, we learn that the boy has been killed by a white police officer, one of the colleagues of the father. And there we join the family and the community in grieving for the loss of the son and this incredible tragedy in the community. Let's hear and see these excerpts from the Glimmerglass production of Blue. Michael, would you roll the video?
Everything about him is big, big frame, big smile, big eyes, big ears, big head full of big ideas. I whisper his name from Lennox Avenue, and he hears me one knocks. He married a cop, he married a cop, he married a cop. Yes. I'm gonna strap my baby on my back. Go to work, I'm gonna strap my baby on my back. Go to work. Keep on keeping on, like our ancestors used to do. I'll be busy with baby, busy with business, making change, changing diapers, feeding my baby, feeding Harlow. Keep on keeping on, keep on keeping on, keep on keeping on. Watch me.
Oh, you have my nose. You've got little fingers. I've counted all your toes. I love your seashell ears. I love your wish of hair. Your big brown eyes that seem to stare. With little fingers you grasp my thumb. Everything that moves inside of me goes numb. My son, my little baby boy, my all the world, my pride and joy. Yes, sir. Got my own private portrait locked down. This is not a drill. Subject in custody, lights out. Yes, sir. Stay alive. That's what you're supposed to do. Look at you. Dressed like somebody's damn gypsy. And get a haircut, pull up your pants. Remove the jewelry. Take off the hoodie. Take off the hoodie, the hoodie, the hoodie, the hoodie, the hoodie. Son, you are black boy, a walking, moving target, a black boy.
Thank you. Wow. I want to say thank you in absentia to Tazewell Thompson and Janine Tesori, librettist and composer, because every time, and I should say Tazewell directed the opera as well, every time I experience any bit of it, I am as devastated as I was on opening night at Glimmerglass, when we realized what a masterpiece had been created by these two great American artists on a story that couldn't feel more immediate and important in the world in which we're living. I don't know if you all caught all the sounds and images as clearly as we hope as they stream over the internet. At one point, the father, when he's giving the talk to the son, describes the son as a black boy, a walking, moving target. In fact, that is what's happened. The boy goes to a protest, which his parents have been discouraging him from doing. They say, let somebody else take care of protesting. Your job is to stay alive. And the boy says, don't worry, nothing's going to happen. And in fact, that's how they lose their son. So let's turn it back to Francesca. And Cesca, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the journey from the idea for the opera to this incredible libretto, to the workshop process, to opening night. I have to tell you, I knew what a talented pair of artists you'd engaged, but it was such a sort of high risk, high reward endeavor to take on a topic this important and sensitive. It was going to have to be a really fine piece of work to stand up to it. And indeed, that's what we got in the end. So how'd you get us there?
Well, of course, theater and opera and commissioning is it's a huge team effort with many people. And having been doing this for 40 years, I've commissioned or directed probably 100 operas, and I'd say maybe 10 of them are really good. And that's the same average as the 19th century. We forget that. And for me, working on new works is really essential to what I believe in doing. And so I also think that it's important in American opera that we try to tell American stories, that we find stories that speak to us, whether they're contemporary issues, whether they're serious, earth-changing issues like this, or whether they're comedies. And so I've been blessed in Washington and in Glimmerglass to have the facilities really to commission works. And as Betsy mentioned, in Washington, we have a program called the American Opera Initiative, where we commission short works every year, 20-minute pieces, 1-hour pieces, to give composers and librettists an opportunity. And that's really important. And so the piece that she had collaborated on and that Tim then expanded was really a work about racism in the military. And that was the story of an Asian man. And this piece, Blue, as I say, came out of my concern in 2015 about the continuing attacks that seem to be happening on young Black men. Since 1980, 260,000 Black men have been killed in the streets. It's a phenomenal number to think about. And I spoke to Taz about it, and of course I said, I want to tell us a story, but I don't want it to, I wanted to help people understand the issue. And so we turned to Janine Tesori, who she had been commissioned by myself previously to write 2 other operas, and has now been commissioned by the Met to write a large piece. And she has a huge success as a theatrical composer. She's won the Tony Award and numerous of other things for her various stories. And I said, I want us to tell a story about a Black family, but also a family who are middle class and who really represent strong members of a community, which they do. And as you heard, it's a police officer and she runs a restaurant. And also about family. Family is core to this issue. What is every parent's nightmare? Losing a child. That is every parent's nightmare. And people live with that their whole lives. And so those were sort of the things that we started out with. And then we ended up interviewing a number of Black police officers. And ironically, one of them was a man who was a super at the Washington National Opera. And that was sort of one of the launch pads. It's a man named Frank Riley. And he was we were doing
I think we lost Francesca again to an internet connectivity issue. I can complete the story because Frank Riley was a super in a production of Dead Men Walking that Francesca directed, and turned out.
Sorry. Okay.
I
don't know what I'm in a great internet place. I don't know why it's happening.
That's fine.
Anyway, so he was really the start of the story, and from there, Caswell interviewed tons of Black officers in Harlem, where the story is set, and then from there, like all new works, you go through this process of workshops and developing it and readings. And so we had workshops in Washington and at Glimmerglass, and then eventually what was so wonderful was we signed on a number of other companies who wanted to do the work, who would have done the work now. So that's really the genesis of the piece. It's, you know, it's so important for companies to commit to new works, and having Tim as a colleague, I know that that's a big part of St. Louis. And so it's a big part of Glimmerglass in Washington. And this piece, I'm so proud, has won the National Musical Critic Award this year, and is, you know, when we come back, is going on to perform at mostly Mozart, the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and of course in Washington and Minnesota and a number of other companies. And we in Washington have just committed to making a recording of it, which we just announced this week as well. So that's a bit about the genesis. And I think, you know, like all new pieces, they either work or they don't, but you have to curate them and you got to babysit them and you have to develop them.
You know, Cheska, thank you for describing the whole sweep of the process. In fact, what Cheska mentioned, that award, the National Music Critics Association Award, it was the best opera of 2020, and that award just came out. And the Washington Post wrote that Blue is the opera on police violence that America needs to see, but can't, because of the situation we find ourselves in, where we cannot do live performances for the time being. And so, as Cheska mentioned, at WNO, we're now planning to find a way to record the opera even under this physical distancing situation that we find ourselves in. And we hope and plan to make a documentary about the creation of the opera and the recording. That'll be our way of getting the work out in front of the public in a new way during this period. Let me turn back to Gordon, because I found that a really important headline in the Washington Post. This is an opera America needs to see, but can't. And so I wanted to ask you, from your point of view as an artist, you mentioned that you've been in the opera business since the late 1980s when you were a Wolf Trap young artist. And of course, you've had a long relationship with the WNO and most of the major American companies and companies all over the world. You were speaking about Blue and how it's a very special project. I wanted to ask you, what did it mean to you personally? You described earlier how your character responds to the material. How did you personally respond? What was it like in the rehearsal room, working on this incredibly sensitive, difficult material day after day?
Yeah, Timothy, that's a great question to ask. Artists, singers in particular, spend a great deal of their lives developing their technique, developing their stagecraft to be able to sing in different languages, to convey different periods and styles. And so I'm well versed at Wagner and Verdi and Mozart and Puccini. One of the most difficult and most self-revealing things that any American artist can do is be self-revealing about themselves. And to take on a piece like Blue, and to take on a subject matter like police violence against African Americans, strikes so close to home that you only have, you really only have two choices, Tim. You either show up and rehearse and perform, and you either tell the truth or you tell a lie. So if I'm going to be truthful, if I'm going to be intimately involved with my colleagues in bringing this piece about, I have to bring myself to rehearsals in a completely open and vulnerable state, which means that I have to confront my issues on race, my issues on religion, my issues on intimacy, censorship. One of the things that I wish you had spoken to Francesca about is, I'm sort of an opera nerd. That's what I do for my life. If you go back and read any autobiography of Verdi, you will see that he had an extremely long and problematic relationship with censors. He had to have his works approved before they could be commissioned and written. The censorship that we have today isn't a panel of private censors or people that review a work. The censorship that we have today is in our own imagination, what we perceive and what we accept.
Wow.
And what we're not willing to accept.
Yeah.
So for a piece like Blue to impact the operatic world and the arts the way that it has, at a time where we are discussing systemic racism, where we are discussing limitations and boundaries. Again, these are physical manifestations, but there is as much an imaginative manifestation where we don't allow ourselves to go beyond our borders and embrace that just because someone has a different pigment, it doesn't mean their emotional palette is any less valid. So that's what I think of. I think of Blue. It gives an opportunity for Black folks to resonate a truth that is universal, regardless of what religion, what pigment, what culture you come from. That's why I think it's extraordinary that these characters are the father, the mother. There are no first names here.
Right.
You really turn, just imagine, if you close your eyes and put this American, very intimate, urban American opera in another language, it would work. If you put it in Italian, German, French. And the beauty of it is that it works in those other languages, but the resonance is of a community, an American community's truth, a voice that is not so readily seen on stage. And that, I think, is a tremendous achievement.
Gordon, thank you. A word that you said that I appreciate your mentioning was being vulnerable, right? Performers, opera singers, part of why I have such admiration for what you do in any opera is the incredible act of courage and vulnerability that it takes to stand up on a stage and sing and let the audience into that most personal of sounds. And in the case of the cast of Blue, I mean, I'll just never forget sitting in the audience and witnessing that act of courage, raised to an exponential power because of the subject matter and the speaking of truth, and the fact that this was our story. This is America's deepest hurt and most open wound, and right there on the stage, an incredible artistic power and integrity, but only possible because the cast committed so deeply to telling the story.
Yes, I think that's the point of it. That sort of time and that sort of trust, to be able to. Opera singers oftentimes are perceived as these attention-seeking beings. We have to sing, we have to be on stage, we have to have the spotlight, we have to have all of these things. And to a certain degree, that is true. I would be lying to you if I said otherwise. But it wouldn't be accurate if I were to say that people, artists, humans, enjoy being on stage and showing that sort of vulnerability and rawness and pain and weakness and strength. Those base emotions are so overpowering and raw. And when they really resonate from the core of your being, sometimes the last place you want to be is in a public place of display.
Right.
And I admire so much my colleagues and the bravery that they showed every day, not just during the handful of performances, every day. Extraordinary human beings, extraordinary.
Gordon, thank you. Let's hear from two more of those people via video now. So we're going to play two videos. First, you're going to hear from Kenneth Kellogg, who plays the father in Blue. And in fact, talk about courage. Kenneth and his wife just had a baby son when the project was getting going. And in fact, the imagery used to promote the opera is literally Kenneth's son in his own hands, having been born shortly before. So we're going to hear from Kenneth talking about the role and also what it meant to him as a person and a father. You'll see that interspersed with some rehearsal footage from Glimmerglass. And then we're going to hear from Tazewell Thompson, who wrote the libretto, about what he hoped to accomplish by creating the piece. So Michael, could we see those two 1-minute videos?
So my name is Kenneth Kellogg. I am playing the father in the production of Blue, which has been intense. The material is really intense. The time I got asked to do this production was the height of a lot of police shootings here. Yes, and that happens, but it's more than that. It's not an attack on police. It's not an attack on the system. It's how a black family deals. It's about the love and support of a community, having to build themselves up, having to deal with pain, having to continue after tragedy. It's really a story of love and endurance. So it's very personal. Blue has been more than just an opera for me. It's become a sense of purpose and a mission to tell a story from a black experience that hasn't been told before, that needs to be told. This is too important of a piece to miss.
You married a cop, you married a cop.
I wanted to write something that was about a family, a black family, and what happened to their lives when their teenage son was taken away from them through a gunshot. The black police officer who is part of Men in Blue, what conflict he would have if it was a fellow police officer who shot his son. And that to me was, certainly the stuff of what makes drama so interesting. Working with Janine Tesori was miraculous, and that is not hyperbole, and that is not exaggeration.
Watch me.
I'm hoping that when they see Blue, that every member of the audience will hold closer their precious ones in their lives.
My goodness, Tazewell, in absentia, thank you for those words, and thank you for giving us the piece. That is exactly what happened to me upon seeing the work. The work deals with a lot of pain. It's ultimately a very hopeful work because it's actually about the resolve of a community to repair, to get beyond, to repair the incredible injustice and pain, and to look forward to a situation where we will get beyond all this moment. It may take a generation or two, but that's what the piece ultimately looks forward to. Cheska, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience in a minute.
Great.
But any final words from you about what it was like having taken this big risk to commission such a courageous work, to have the audience respond as they did, to have the artistic community respond as they did, and to hear so much from critics. I mean, I've actually never read reviews that were so unanimously over the moon for anything, let alone a world premiere. It had to be quite affirming for you.
Absolutely. I think it's very gratifying as a general director of a company when we can bring together art and ideas and dialogue and make audiences love the art, but also go away thinking about something. And I think all of us in the arts long for those moments when that happens. And I was very gratified that we had overwhelming positive reactions from the audience and really good conversations with people. And also people who were very upset by it and who wrote, me and called me with big complaints, as well as very positive things. And I think that's a great thing. I mean, and Glimmerglass, because it's a festival, we're often poised in a way to really speak about issues that are socially responsible today. We have a commitment to performing at Attica Prison. We have a huge youth program. And this Blue was very much in line with all of our values in our community and for the company. So for me, it was very gratifying. Even when people write you and complain and call you and complain, it's good because you can talk to people and you have art to use as a way to talk to people. And right now, I think we all know that our country is, facing a pandemic, economic issues, social change, and something like this is definitely a conduit for conversation. So for that, I was grateful.
Gail, I feel like we have barely scratched the surface, but the time flew by, as it always does when you're speaking to brilliant people. So I know we probably have questions from the audience that we would be happy to now take. And if we don't, I can keep going indefinitely. So why don't you take over?
Thank you. I know, thank you so much. Those were powerful, mighty powerful teasers that you gave us. I think those of us who have not had a chance to see and to hear all of the music yet are going to be on the edges of our seats waiting for the Washington National Opera production or another one that's scheduled. I think we can see why the adjective visionary was used in the introduction by Betsy and several of you. It's amazing what you have created, Francesca, just amazing. And we owe a huge debt of gratitude to you for facing these important issues. I'm going to toss the first question over to Betsy, give her a chance at it, and then we'll see who else is in the queue. I know I've got one as well, but Betsy, if you'd like to lead off, I wish you would, please. You have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. One of the things that attracted me to the program at Glimmerglass was the work that they do with Attica. And Francesca knows how devoted I am to that piece of the programming. Would you ever consider doing Blue at Attica?
We would definitely consider it. Just briefly for home viewers, we've had a 7-year program of bringing opera to Attica Prison. And we also now have a program there where we work with inmates. We have a chorus, the Attica Chorus, who perform with us when we bring singers there. We would love to bring Blue there. It definitely has to pass approval of the warden. And I'm not sure that the subject matter would do so, but I think after the pandemic, it's certainly something that I will open up with him. He's incredibly open-minded and willing to work with us. And we've, as I said, have now had 7-year relationship with people there. So I would love to bring it there. And certainly if not there, we're also considering working with Auburn Prison, but Attica has been very much has worked with us, and we've brought Macbeth, La Boheme, West Side Story, just a lot of different material there, Porgy and Bess, and it's a huge part of our commitment to work with social justice. So I'd love to bring Blue there. It's not up to me, it's up to them.
Well, we will stay tuned for that and watch.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Betsy and Francesca. So I have a question. I'm going to direct it to Tim. When you were in St. Louis, you showed yourself to be a master of taking a difficult, controversial piece. I'm thinking especially of Death of Klinghoffer, and working with the community, not for days, not for weeks, but for months before the production was actually mounted, to stimulate discussion, conversation, to bring various points of view and sides together, to create a dialogue that was extremely helpful in getting the community to accept a very controversial piece. In fact, the same Death of Klinghoffer caused such a riotous reaction in New York that I believe it was disrupted in its presentation. But you managed to use it as a teaching moment. We've all heard the expression that we should let no good crisis go to waste. There is such a teaching opportunity in this material. How would you propose to go about that, Tim, in Washington leading up to the performances?
Gail, thanks very much for the question, and you're very, very kind. This idea that, why do we do art? And Francesca's answer, which she mentioned the word conversation. I think one of the things that made us so eager to work together is actually that we believe in this idea that art is a thing of beauty and beautiful and important for its own sake, but that's not the only reason that we have art. We have art because of its power to connect people, and I've always found that the power to connect people across their differences, whether differences in race or differences in political point of view or differences in ideology, people are moved by the same things for the same reasons when you're in an artistic lens. And so people can connect to, and I think that's why it's so important that, as Gordon mentioned, this is a work about a family. It could be any family. What makes it powerful is the specifics of the situation, but what makes it resonate is its universality. Every mother and father feel the same way about their child. And so every person in the audience can relate to the tragedy. Indeed, Cheska and I in Washington viewed it as an opportunity to do everything we could to stimulate the right kind of conversation in the community. Something Cheska said before is about curation, right? So you don't just, doing a work that is sensitive, you don't just put it out there and hope for the best. You really have a responsibility, we think, to set it up for success by how you tee up the conversation. And so I have a colleague at the Washington National Opera, Jennifer Bowman, Director of Music Education, among many other colleagues there, who helped us put together a steering committee of community members who were invited in more than a year before the scheduled premiere of Blue to help give us advice about what are the right kinds of opportunities to stimulate dialogue that would be constructive around this incredibly painful topic. So there's an organization in Washington called the Justice Roundtable, and they invited us in to help bring stakeholders together. That's an organization that advocates for changes in the criminal justice system. We had somebody who's the retired executive director of the National Black Police Association, also a former member of the Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C. He was one of our guiding lights in organizing these conversations. The chief of police of the Metropolitan Police Department, Peter Newsham, came to a panel discussion at a restaurant in DC called Busboys and Poets. And he was a panelist next to Kenneth Kellogg, who happens to have grown up in Washington, next to the executive director of the ACLU for Washington, DC. And that's the kind of dialogue that is extraordinary and possible in this case because of an opera, of all things, an artistic project that brought people out of their usual roles in connecting across this kind of difference. The project, though, that I was most moved by, it's actually the last live event that I went to before the pandemic shut everything down, is we had a group of teenagers, Black teenagers and Latinx teenagers at the Latin American Youth Center, who worked with teaching artists from an organization in Washington, D.C. called Creative Nomads, and police officers who are musicians. They're called the Side Band of the Metropolitan Police Department. And the teenagers and police officers worked over the course of weeks on creating original works of music and spoken word about the subject of what causes them fear and what causes them hope. And of course, the power of the artistic collaboration to bridge all kinds of lack of trust and distance and pain among those two groups was extraordinary. So I got to go to the performance of this collaboration on March 12th. It was the next day everything got shut down, and that only a collaboration in the community that resulted from the production being on the way to opening night at the Kennedy Center.
Well, I can tell, thank you. I can tell you're working the same magic in Washington that you did in St. Louis. There are a couple of quick questions for Francesca. One was, what was the nature of the complaints you got? You mentioned that you had some people complaining to you for this work. And
right. Yeah, I saw some of the questions. Some people felt it was inappropriate material for an opera. That was what I heard the most. But then, for me, probably the most gratifying thing was the amount of mothers who came to me, white and of color, and who shared with me, some of them, their stories, which were very moving. And Cooperstown, New York is in an area where I wouldn't say that racial diversity characterizes our area. Gordon knows, having worked here. And I had a number of Black mothers in the area who came to me and just weeping and said, "You have told my story and my fears." And there were several mothers who came to every performance. We also had a number of Black youth. We have programs in Albany, Utica, and Syracuse who came busing, and we had talks with those kids afterwards. And those were, in a way, the most amazing and probably the most meaningful. And the people who complained, look, you have to remember, we get complaints when we do La Boheme. You have to realize that people complain, why are we sitting through that again? Yeah. And I certainly know Gordon spoke to many, many audience members. Many people stayed afterwards for Q&As and discussions. And I think those were very powerful. And there were some negative people too there, right, Gordon?
Absolutely. I think one of the important things that you should bear in mind about this work and the subject matter and the fallout that might make people uncomfortable. Number one, you never see the act. We don't glorify the violence of the act. You never see the white police officer that shoots the son. What you see is the impact of those actions on a family and on a community. It's the impact, not the action. We are always affected by actions. Sometimes we become numb from events that occur. What matters is what we do next. That's the important issue, not the event. We will have many more events that will rock our world and alter and affect our society for the better, sometimes for the worse. What matters is how we digest them, how we dialogue, how we interact, how we intimately engage with one another, and how we move forward. That's what a society does. And if culture and art can help shape that, so much the better. That's what I think Blue can do effectively. And that's what I think opera can do effectively. It's not just events that occur in our community, it's what we do after the event occurs.
Gordon, that was beautifully spoken. I don't think any of us could improve on the thoughts that you just expressed there.
Sure you can. Sure you can. You want to know how?
How?
Keep your hearts open and make room for people and thought. Keep your hearts open. That's the first step. Keep your hearts open. I'm not saying be a bleeding heart liberal. I'm not advocating a certain political position. I'll say that for another day after you buy me, a beer or a glass of wine. But when it comes to ideas, when it comes to exchange, keep your heart open to the possibility of things. Make room for it. That's what we can do.
Well, that's a beautiful message, and I can't improve on that either. All I can do is try to follow your advice and hope to be able to. So we've come to that moment when we need to bring this to a close. I want to thank all three of you, Francesca, Tim, and Gordon, for your insights, your passion, your vision. Thank you for giving us just a little taste of what we have to look forward to when Blue becomes available. One question that we didn't have a chance to get to was how we could see the film. So at the risk of destroying that beautiful atmosphere that Gordon said, I'll just ask, when do we think the film might be available?
Thank you for the question. And Gordon and Francesca, thank you for your incredible artistry and for sharing all this with us. Like everything else relating to the pandemic, we don't know because it all depends how quickly we can manage to get all the artists together safely to create the recording. We're working through all the considerations and logistics for that now. And then it will depend when we can get the film made and completed. We're shooting for the late fall or early in the new calendar year to be able to release the film. So
wonderful.
Stay tuned.
Wonderful. That's a hopeful note to end on. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening.